in the series, and my 4th book that I wrote is called Something's Tugging on My Claw. And a lot of teachers from Maine wanted me to write a book for them because they have a mandatory unit that they have to teach that the state mandates about lobsters. And they wanted a fun way that's rhythmic and rhyming and colorful to introduce the unit so it would look like the unit would be fun for them. Well, I looked at all of the things that have been written about lobsters, and I thought, it's kind of been done. So I kind of put that on the back burner and said, I don't know if I want to do it. Until Ron Hemion, who is a lobster fisherman who's local, he caught the most beautiful cyan blue lobster. You can come up and look at the book if you can't see now. But that's the lobster. He was 1.5 pounds. He was a male. And I'm saying was, but I let him go. Hopefully he's having a great life in the ocean, and he's living on in my story as well. Well, I took him up to, I was doing a book tour with Barnes & Noble at the time, and I did a story time up in Augusta, Maine. And the kids there named him George. So I thought, that's a cool name. I think the prince over in England was just born at the time, and then we have George Washington. So I thought, oh, that's a regal name. So it stuck. So I took him to preschools and elementary schools and a whole lot of Barnes & Noble stores. And while I was working with him, I thought of a story that was different from anything that I'd ever seen written about lobsters before. And they have a defense mechanism that not too many people know about. And if something grabs a hold of their claw and he can't get free and it won't let go, he can just drop his claw, just let it go, and then he flaps his tail under him really, really fast so he can swim backwards to hide under a rock or a piece of seaweed. And then, when he sheds his shell, he will grow a new one back again. It's going to be much smaller than the one he lost, and he's going to have to molt several times before he gets a claw that's as big as the one that he lost or close to it. So I thought that would be a really cool story to do, to teach kids and adults about that. And of course he has to go on a little journey to find out what had a hold of his claw. And then once he finds out, he sheds his shell and he grows, and he's got a new little claw that is going to grow bigger and bigger. And I thought that was kind of a cool book for them to introduce the unit with. The color of this lobster is George. But the lobster itself is not. And the reason I didn't draw from George is because George was a big 1.5 pound lobster. He was an adult. And so I didn't want, and I wanted a young lobster that was learning about himself, not a grown lobster that was, should have known at that point how things worked. So I do have a scientific permit, and I had 2 little baby lobsters that I was drawing from. And one of them's name was Loki, because I had a contest, and that's what everybody thought that was a good name. And the other one had no name at all, because I barely used him. He was kind of, he hung out, he had like the best life ever, because he got fed and everything, but he didn't have to do any work. Well, I sent the book to print, and then that very day, not one, but both of my baby lobsters molted. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy that didn't happen a couple weeks earlier, or I might not have been able to finish the book. Well, I wanted Loki's shell so bad, but I knew that lobsters, one of the things they need is when they shed their shell, like the horseshoe crabs, they just let that shell go. They don't want anything more to do with it. But lobsters have to keep their shell for 2 reasons. Number one, they are so super soft that they couldn't catch any food if they tried, because they're almost jelly. They're so soft. And anything will eat them because they're really vulnerable at that point. And so they have to stay hidden. So they take the molted shell and they eat it. And not only does it provide them food, but it also provides them nutrients to help to make their new shell harder, quicker. So I couldn't take the shell away from him without giving him something. So I took his shell out, and then I took the other lobster's shell, and I split it between the two of them. And they ate, both of them ate I mean, sometimes they will leave some behind, but because they only had a half a shell each, they ate the whole thing. And their shells got super hard, and I was able to let Loki and his friend go. And if you want to see that, I've got a video on my website. Also, if you want to see a clam being eaten by a moon snail, you can see the radula, and you can even see the little teeth working, which is really cool. Took me years to see that and film it. But, so, I let them go, and then I took Loki's shell all around to schools, and oh, it was great, you know, I got to see what I drew from, until it started falling apart. So, I took his shell to a taxidermist, just for your own knowledge. If you have a shell like a lobster shell, a shellfish shell that needs to be put together by a taxidermist, don't let it get dried out, because that makes the job really hard. I did not know that. So I brought this shell, and the taxidermist said, oh sure, I'll have no problem putting that together. A year later, he still didn't have it together, and he did succeed. He worked really hard, researched it, oh my goodness, he did so much work for me, what a nice guy. He did lose the 2 antennas that I gave him, which was kind of sad because I do teach kids about the lobster through using Loki's shell. And he painted him. I don't know why. I wish he hadn't done that, but that's okay because he did a super job putting Loki's shell together, and now I can show you how small the lobster was that I was drawing from. And you can really see, if you know anything about lobsters at all, a large adult lobster does not, it looks like that, it's got all the same parts, but body type wise, it's very different. And if I had drawn from George, the book just wouldn't have been the same, I don't think. So this is Loki.